Look around you right now. Just, take a second.
Yeah, really take inventory of what's in the room.
Right, grab your smartphone, look at the heads-up display in your car, your laptop. I mean, even those wireless headphones you've got.
Yeah.
You are just surrounded by sleek, perfectly finished technology.
Oh, absolutely.
But inside almost every single device you've touched today, there is a microscopic component made by, well, a single, practically invisible giant.
Completely invisible to the average person.
Totally. Welcome to the Japan Stock Podcast edition of this deep dive. Today, our mission is to decode Murata Manufacturing, ticker 6981. We're tracking their strategic evolution all the way through their corporate intelligence heading into mid-2026.
It's a fascinating timeline to look at.
It really is. And the core paradox we're unpacking today is this. Murata is an absolute behemoth. They are the undisputed kingmaker of the modern tech supply chain.
Right.
But to the average consumer, they don't even exist.
And, that invisibility is exactly why we need a rigorous, macro-driven framework to truly understand their valuation and their risks.
Because it's easy to just assume they're untouchable.
Exactly. It's very easy to look at a company that claims overwhelming market dominance and just, take their word for it, assuming their moat is impenetrable. We aren't doing that today.
No, we're not. We want the reality.
Right. We are looking strictly at the hard numbers, the earnings per share, the return on equity, and some incredibly sensitive geopolitical friction points. We need to see if the armor they've built over the last decade actually holds up under the severe market pressures we're seeing globally right now.
So let's start by defining what they actually do, because their corporate tagline, innovator in electronics, is incredibly vague.
It really doesn't tell you much at all.
No, not at all. So if data is the traffic of the digital world, Murata builds the microscopic traffic lights and guardrails that stop the cars from crashing into each other.
I like that visualization.
Thanks. But I want to break this down mechanically. On paper, they dominate the market for MLCCs. What exactly is an MLCC and, why should an investor care?
Okay, so an MLCC stands for a multi-layer ceramic capacitor. To really understand its value, think of it as a microscopic dam in an electrical river.
Okay, a dam.
All right. When a processor in your smartphone, or say your car, needs to execute a complex task, it requires an instantaneous burst of energy.
And I'm guessing a standard battery can't handle that.
Exactly. A battery cannot deliver that power fast enough. So the MLCC sits right next to the processor, holding back a tiny reserve of electrical energy. And it releases it at the exact millisecond the processor demands it. And they do this millions of times a second. Without them, the processor just starves, overheats, or shorts out.
And when you say microscopic, we're talking about components so small they look like grains of sand, right?
Pretty much. You could sneeze and lose 1,000 of them.
Wow. Yet they are the absolute bottleneck of modern manufacturing. Which actually brings us to the real drama of Murata's adaptation.
Yeah, the strategic pivot.
Right. If you rewind to the early 2010s, they were heavily reliant on smartphone demand. Communication tech was their absolute cash cow, but that obviously created a massive vulnerability.
It created a profound organizational scar, actually. When the smartphone market inevitably saturated and those upgrade cycles lengthened, Murata learned a very painful lesson about concentration risk.
But the hallmark of a resilient company is turning a scar into armor.
Exactly. They recognized early on that they needed to pivot aggressively toward automobiles, specifically targeting what the industry calls the KC revolution.
Right. Case-connected, autonomous, shared, and electric vehicles. Let's pause on that EV transition for a second because we hear that buzzword constantly.
We do, yeah.
An EV isn't just a car. It's practically a rolling supercomputer dealing with massive lethal voltages, which means it needs an entirely different scale of electronic infrastructure compared to a traditional gas car.
I'd take it a step further and put the hard numbers on it. A standard internal combustion engine vehicle might use around 3,000 of these MLCCs.
Okay, 3,000.
Right. But a modern level 3 autonomous electric vehicle, that can require upwards of 15 to 20,000 individual capacitors.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it is an exponential leap in component density. Because they recognized this shift early, Murata fought their way to an incredible 50% global market share in automotive MLCCs.
50%. That's a bold claim, just chalk up to foresight. Whenever I see a massive transition like that, I have to ask, was that incredible luck simply being the biggest player in the room when the market shifted, or was it genuinely deliberate?
The market intelligence clearly points to a deeply deliberate strategy. It's driven by an internal philosophy they call serendipity in R&D.
Serendipity, like a happy accident.
Sort of, but engineered serendipity. They don't just react to obvious existing needs, they actively hunt for what they classify as unseen needs. A perfect mechanical example of this is their Kumihimo project.
The imagery of that name is fascinating. A kumihimo is a traditional Japanese braided cord, right? You take multiple distinct, fragile threads and weave them together to create a single structure that's incredibly strong.
That is the exact operating logic of the project. Historically, massive suppliers like Murata had incredibly strict credit, volume, and business constraints.
So they were hard to work with if you were small.
Exactly. If you were a small startup with a brilliant idea for a new medical device or an environmental sensor, you couldn't even get Murata to return your call, let alone supply you with prototype components.
Right.
The Kumihimo project fundamentally inverted that model. By braiding their world-class hardware together with the agile, untested ideas of startup companies, Murata essentially crowdsources their R&D.
Oh, that's brilliant. They uncover hidden market applications and lock in future clients before their major competitors even realize those new markets exist.
Precisely.
But, being the dominant force in that hardware space means you're constantly fighting off other massive suppliers trying to eat your market share.
Oh, without a doubt.
Let's pit Murata against its top rivals for a second. Heavyweight players like Samsung Electromechanics and TDK. Because they aren't operating in a vacuum, and they've chosen very different battle tactics.
Yeah, if we analyze the competitive landscape, we see two distinct strategic paths. Many competitors, particularly those tied to larger consumer conglomerates, opt for what we can call Path B.
And what does that look like?
It's a strategy heavily reliant on scaling volume. They push out massive quantities of standardized components and use their sheer scale to win on price.
Got it.
Murata, however, chose Path A, which is absolute obsessive vertical integration.
This is formalized as MQMS, right?
Yeah.
The Murata Quality Management System.
That's the one.
Under this system, they don't just assemble the components. They actually develop their own raw material powders, they build their own custom manufacturing ovens, design the internal production processes, and only then do they manufacture the final capacitor.
Right. It is an unbroken chain of scientific management from the literal dirt up to the finished device.
I have to push back on that intuitively, though. Hasn't the entire tech industry spent the last, 20 years outsourcing and specializing?
Yeah, pretty much.
So owning the entire supply chain from dirt to device, that just seems like a phenomenally expensive and bloated way to do business in a market that constantly faces severe commoditization pressures.
Well, you're not wrong. It is astronomically expensive to maintain. But you really have to look at the economic moat it creates.
Okay, walk me through the moat.
In the world of microscopic electronics, where failure rates must be measured in parts per billion, controlling the purity of the raw barium titanate powder dictates the ultimate performance and thermal reliability of the finished product.
Right, because if you buy your powder from a third party, your ceiling for innovation is capped by that third party's capabilities.
Exactly. By owning the underlying science, Murata achieves something highly rare: mass customization.
Oh, interesting.
They can scale global production while tailoring the chemical and thermal specifications to the exact needs of an Apple or a Tesla.
So the immense upfront cost essentially buys them a structural advantage that competitors literally cannot replicate without spending a decade building their own material science labs.
Precisely. And that is exactly why they maintain a commanding 40% global market share in MLCCs overall. You simply cannot achieve that level of dominance by just assembling someone else's raw materials more efficiently.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But holding a 40% market share means your operations are inherently spread across the globe.
Highly globalized.
Yeah, and if you map out their footprint, it looks less like a victory lap and a lot more like a geopolitical tightrope. We really need to examine their global exposure, starting with the massive friction points of international trade.
Right. And when we talk about friction, Greater China is the undisputed epicenter of both their opportunity and their operational resilience.
How concentrated are we talking?
To quantify that exposure, about 50% of Murata's consolidated sales and roughly 20% of their physical production capacity are tied to the Greater China region.
Wow, that is a staggering concentration of risk. And we know they've already felt the pain of that exposure. The lockdowns in 2022 left some deep operational scars, didn't they?
Very deep. In just a single quarter, those localized supply chain disruptions wiped out 20 billion yen in sales.
Just gone.
Yeah, just gone. But they survived it. And supposedly, it forced them to build a much more resilient, localized supply chain within the region.
Right, leveraging local talent and stable policy support to ensure their Chinese facilities could operate somewhat autonomously.
They did. But past resilience in one region does not neutralize future risk from another. Based on the strategic posturing we're seeing heading into 2026, we have to issue a preemptive warning regarding their exposure to the United States.
The Trump effect.
Yes, exactly. We are looking directly at the explicit threat of the Trump effect, specifically the aggressive, rapid deployment of tariffs and escalating U.S.-China trade friction.
Plus, the increasing U.S. restrictions on high-tech exports to China. Let's walk the listener through exactly how that works. Break down the causal chain for me. How does a political speech in Washington about trade policy actually vaporize earnings for a component manufacturer sitting in Kyoto?
It's a cascading failure across the supply chain. When the U.S. slaps a broad tariff on Chinese-assembled electronics, the cost of importing those goods spikes immediately.
Naturally.
So Murata, who manufactures components in China and sells them to a major assembler like Apple or Tesla, suddenly faces immense pricing pressure. Those companies have to pass the tariff costs onto the consumer by raising the price of the iPhone or the EV.
And when prices jump, consumers hold off on buying.
Exactly. Fewer finished products sold means the assemblers drastically slash their component orders. I want you to just let that reality sink in for a second.
Yeah, that's heavy.
It is. That dual-threat reality, direct hits to U.S. exports and indirect hits via weakened end consumer demand, is something investors must weigh heavily.
Which opens up a much broader macro what-if scenario. Because trade wars aren't the only variable here.
Not at all.
What if conflict in the Middle East severely disrupts shipping lanes through the Strait of Hormuz, spiking energy costs? Or what if enhanced Chinese export controls on critical dual-use minerals bottleneck the exact raw materials Murata needs for that famous vertical integration?
Those are very real threats.
How sensitive is their underlying cost structure to these global shocks?
Their sensitivity is acute. And this is where we have to look at the hard math of foreign exchange. Beyond the raw material bottlenecks, the currency markets completely dictate their daily reality.
Really? Just the exchange rate alone?
Oh, yeah. We estimate that a mere 1 yen fluctuation against the dollar swings Murata's operating profit by approximately 6 billion yen annually.
Wait, so if the yen strengthens from, say, 150 to 140 against the dollar, that is a 60 billion yen hit to their operating profit, regardless of how brilliantly their factories are running.
Exactly. It swings their top-line sales by roughly 11 billion yen per single yen movement. When geopolitical stress causes currency whiplash, Murata's balance sheet absorbs the impact instantly.
Let's step into the engine room then. We need to explicitly connect these macro and geopolitical variables to the actual bottom line, the earnings per share and the return on equity. How does this turbulence translate into earnings?
Geopolitics isn't just theoretical risk. It directly models into EPS. A clear historical example is the escalation of the Ukraine crisis.
How did that hit them?
That conflict severely disrupted European automotive supply chains, dragging down global auto production by an estimated 2.5 million units.
Wow.
Now, if every modern vehicle requires 10,000 MLCCs, taking 2.5 million cars out of the production schedule instantly vaporizes the demand for tens of billions of highly profitable automotive components.
That is brutal.
Yeah, that directly and immediately pressured Murata's EPS.
But look at the flip side of that equation. The structural global surge in electric vehicles is acting as their ultimate EPS growth engine, compensating for those macro shocks.
It's their primary counterweight, definitely.
And they aren't just sitting back hoping the EV boom lasts. If we visualize the sheer scale of their reinvestment, it's just staggering. I mean, in 2022 alone, they poured 240 billion yen into capital expenditures.
A massive outlay.
On top of that, they directed over 124 billion yen straight into R&D. That was 7.4% of their total sales. They didn't just tweak a budget. They built an entirely new innovation engine while simultaneously fighting global supply chain fires.
And if you look at the strategic moves management is making right now heading into mid-2026, you see a massive acceleration in business continuity planning, or BCP.
The ASEAN transition.
Yes, management has clearly realized that relying on a single dominant manufacturing hub in Greater China is no longer a viable long-term strategy, regardless of how efficient it is. They are actively tearing up the old playbook and building a multipolar production system.
So they're essentially redrawing their global map to dodge the tariffs and trade restrictions we just discussed.
That's exactly what they're doing.
They are dramatically expanding their manufacturing footprint in Southeast Asia, specifically pushing massive subsidiaries in Thailand and the Philippines, and using Singapore as the central nervous system to coordinate this entire ASEAN network.
It is a profound structural pivot, but building a multipolar supply chain across Southeast Asia requires a staggering amount of upfront cash.
Yeah, it does.
And if they are pouring hundreds of billions of yen into breaking ground on new Thai and Philippine factories, retail investors are rightfully asking, well, what is left for my dividend?
That is the ultimate question of capital allocation. When we look at the investment versus the reward, what is the actual truth in the cash?
Management's stated policy is to target a dividend payout ratio of around 30% and a dividend on equity, or DOE, of 4% or more. They have consistently raised dividends over the years, pushing it to levels like 120 yen per share. They point to this specific metric as evidence that they are a strong, shareholder-friendly company.
I have to challenge that narrative hard, though. Has that shareholder-friendly approach ever actually held up under scrutiny when a company is in the middle of a massive global rebuild?
It's a fair question to ask.
Because usually, when management prioritizes endless empire building and multi-billion yen capex projects, retail investors get left holding the bag. Are they genuinely prioritizing the shareholder, or are they just checking the required corporate governance boxes to keep institutional investors from revolting?
That is perhaps the defining tension of analyzing Murata as an investment. You are entirely right to be skeptical. It is a very delicate balancing act.
So it's a bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, the dividend growth is mathematically real and they are returning cash, but make no mistake, their absolute uncompromising priority remains heavy capex.
They had to defend the moat.
They have to spend those billions to defend the vertical integration moat we discussed and to build the ASEAN lifeboats. In reality, what you're looking at is a highly aggressive defensive reinvestment strategy that is cleverly dressed up to look like a balanced yield play for the markets.
Which means, as a retail investor, you aren't just passively collecting a dividend. You are directly subsidizing a massive multi-year supply chain rebuild. You are literally paying for those factories in the Philippines.
You are. And that leads directly to my final professional prudence as an analyst.
Lay it on us.
Do not just be a cheerleader for their market dominance. The historical numbers look strong, their technological moat is practically unbreachable, but there is a glaring blind spot in their forward-looking model.
Okay, what is a specific blind spot investors are missing here?
The critical vulnerability is the speed of their ASEAN transition versus the speed of geopolitical friction.
A race against time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The strategy of moving 20% of their production out of the China crosshairs and scaling up in Thailand and the Philippines, that sounds fantastic in a boardroom.
But executing it is different.
Very different. Building a factory and actually achieving high-yield, microscopic manufacturing at scale are two entirely different things. If punitive U.S. tariffs and severe trade restrictions hit faster than those new ASEAN plants can scale up to full capacity, Murata will face a severe earnings gap.
So the EPS takes a hit.
Their EPS will take an unmodeled beating. For investors looking at this space, you might want to wait for clear, hard data confirming those ASEAN output volumes are actually hitting their operational targets before jumping in aggressively.
That is a crucial reality check. You cannot just model the destination. You have to survive the transition.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us on this Japan Stock Podcast edition of The Deep Dive. We started today by looking at a company that is essentially invisible to the average consumer.
Completely hidden in plain sight.
Right. But we've seen that by manufacturing the literal building blocks of modern technology, Murata is actually the ultimate proxy for understanding global trade wars, supply chain resilience, and the sheer capital required to survive the EV revolution.
They truly are the invisible architecture of the modern global economy.
They really are. And I want to leave you with a sharp, provocative thought to consider as you watch this space and your own devices over the next 3 years.
What's the thought?
If a major, completely insurmountable trade wall goes up tomorrow between the United States and China, does Murata's invisible nature in the supply chain protect them from the fallout? Or does it make them the very first hidden casualty?